folks, and welcome to this episode of Sparkles for Better Mental Health. I'm Dr. Christine Sauer, the host of this postcard. Host. Let's start that again. A postcard host, isn't it? Hi, folks, and welcome to this episode of Sparkles to Better Mental Health. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer, the host of this podcast and show. And I'm so happy today to have Dr. Nina Savelle Rocklin on the show. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's awesome because I know that you are a renowned author and a podcast host yourself, and you are one of the nation's leading psychoanalysts that is known for the psychology of eating. How exciting. And your signature message is that you're saying it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating at you. And I couldn't agree more. And this has resonated with hundreds of thousands of listeners from around the globe in 45 countries. As a founder of the Binge Cure Method, you guide emotional eaters to lasting food freedom so they can take back control of their lives and feel good in their bodies. Wow, welcome so much. So, Dr. Nina, tell me your story. How did you get to do what you're doing?
You know, when I was a brand new therapist, I remember my very first group for women with binge eating disorder. I walked in the room and there are these women, and one of them, and remember, I'm a brand new therapist, and here's this woman, she's like in her 50s, she had bright red hair, big clothes, big necklace. She was intimidating to me at that time. And she looked me up and down and she said, "So what does a skinny bitch like you know about binge eating?"
Okay.
So what I said was, well, that's how I felt, right? My eyes were like saucers. And I said, well, this skinny bitch once scarfed down an entire box of gingerbread cookies in about 15 minutes flat. And I hate gingerbread, but I couldn't stop eating those cookies. And I told the group that my knowledge of eating disorders started personally when I was 5 years old, and I seemingly randomly looked at my thighs and thought they were too big. I was a perfectly normal weight child, and I will in a moment share exactly what happened, why I would think that I was too big. But this began my descent into really eating disorder hell, so that by the time I was an adolescent, if you look at my journals, my diaries from those times, every page is filled with numbers. Calories I ate, calories I burned, the weight I was, the weight I was going to be one day. So I was always on a crazy restrictive diet. Eventually, my willpower would fail and I would eat the kitchen. And sometimes I would purge, which is why I considered myself the poster child for eating disorders, because I had them all. So finally, I go to therapy in college after 15 years of this cycle. And I talked with my therapist about everything in my life except food, guys, goals, dreams, fears, all the things. But I never told her what was going on with food. She had no idea. And yet by the time I left, all my eating disorders were gone. And people say, how is that possible? How do you get rid of all eating disorders without ever talking about food? And my answer was, well, that's because food was never actually the problem. It was the solution to the problem. It's like plucking a weed and thinking that it's never going to grow back. You've got to get to that proverbial root, which I particularly like because our unconscious hidden minds, like those roots, are hidden from us. So then I decided that I wanted to become a therapist and help other people stop the madness. But I just want to say, why? Why at age 5 did I suddenly decide that I was too big? Well, I was a very lively child, and my parents were our professors. And they were very academic, more on the quiet side, more serious. And I was a kid. And they were always telling me, calm down. You're too loud. You're too dramatic. You're too emotional. And this idea of you're too much resonated in my 5-year-old psyche as there's too much of you, right? Kids are so concrete. So the message of you're too much became there's too much of you, which meant, oh, well, maybe if there were less of me, I would somehow be more lovable, likable, and acceptable. And so both of these experiences speak to the importance of, as you know, psychology when it comes to understanding the why behind binge eating disorder, binge eating, emotional eating, stress eating, any kind of disordered relationship with food. It is, if you're turning to food, it is for a reason, and it's all about discovering what is that reason.
Now, I love that approach because, as you know, I'm all about root cause medicine too. Now, let's talk a little bit about eating disorders. What is it really and how it is defined?
Well, I, in particular, treat people with binge eating disorder, and binge eating disorder is actually the most prevalent type of eating the eating disorders are anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder, and then eating disorder not otherwise specified, which is everything that doesn't fit in that category. But binge eating disorder is actually the most prevalent of those eating disorders that most people don't even know they have. They think they have no willpower, no control. They think they're food addicts, and they have no idea that they are, in fact, dealing with a diagnosable and treatable condition that is characterized by binge episodes of at least 3 times a week, of eating way more food than one would normally eat. I'll get into that in a moment. And feeling deep shame and self-recrimination afterwards. Um, by the way, the word binge is often misused. Many people will say, "Oh my God, I binged. I had 4 cookies," and it's like, no, that is not a binge. 40 cookies. That's 40 cookies is a binge, plus the leftover pizza, plus the stuff your kids didn't have, plus that cake in the trash, plus this, plus that. So, a binge is characterized by that sort of frenzied, compulsive feeling where you just can't stop. And people are very surprised to hear that it actually has nothing to do with food, or addiction. So that is binge eating disorder. And it's really important that if someone is listening to this, or someone you suspect might be struggling with food, that they may have an eating disorder, and it is not about willpower or anything else like that.
Now, I have a few questions, of course, and let's just start with one of them. Now, you said when you binge 40 cookies, cakes, everything that's in the fridge. Now, if you eat that much, how the heck do you stay thin?
Well, some people compensate by the time, you mean, how did I stay thin?
How did you stay thin, and how do people with binge disorder
Oh,
stay thin?
because,
Or do they?
well, how I stayed thin was and my weight would go up and down, by the way, but how I stayed thin was I would binge, and sometimes I would purge, so bulimia. And then sometimes I just wouldn't eat for days afterwards. I'd subsist on Diet Cokes and, an apple. And it was just hell, horrible. Some people who have binge eating disorder are thin, some are normal weight, and some are overweight. And another misconception is that people with binge eating disorder are overweight, or overweight people have struggle with binging. Some do, some don't. Many people are overweight just because they make bad choices, or they have different kinds of metabolisms, or whatever it is. Like my father, he can eat. He doesn't have binge eating disorder, but he just has this super fast metabolism, which I inherited. He can eat so much, and he's stick thin, and so part of it is just just metabolism. But I'm glad you bring this up, because there is that idea that when you can look at someone and know if they struggle with food in some way from an eating disorder perspective, and that is absolutely not the case.
Now, when you look at and that's one of my areas of interest, the obesity epidemic. People are getting bigger and bigger, and I myself was 325 pounds at one point. And most of them become yo-yo dieters over time because, as we know, diets don't work. What do you see as a main cause that disordered eating generally is more common?
Well, I am very anti-diet. I don't know, never trust a four-letter word where the first three letters spell die. Um, that's my philosophy of dieting. And of course, diets don't work in the long run for many reasons, but from psychologically, they focus on what you are eating and not why. And diets tell you what to eat, and they separate you from your natural ability to be an intuitive eater, and I could go on, but what I think that causes eating disorders, it is a way of coping. I call it a frenemy, specifically binge eating disorder. It is a friend. It does something for you. It distracts you. It numbs you. It comforts you. If you are lonely, it symbolically fills a void. If you are in emotional pain, it can unconsciously convert emotional pain to physical pain. There are so many reasons why. But in the 20 years that I've done this work, I can tell you I've worked with people all over the world, all backgrounds, men, women, non-binary, non-binary. And everybody has one thing in common, which is an inability to self-soothe. And that, I believe, comes from the greater issue, which is in our culture that says, hey, don't have feelings. You're weak if you have feelings. You're strong if you can push those feelings away. And so what do we do when we have emotions, which are simply reactions to situations and not character flaws? What do we do when we have these emotions, which are simply there to connect us to ourselves and to each other, but we have pathologized them? We are scared of them. We try to positive think them away or don't feel them. Well, when you invariably, if you're a person living in the world, you're going to have an emotional reaction to things that are happening in the world. If you don't know how to cope with things that are challenging or painful or upsetting, that's why we turn to food or, different things. There's a reason there's so many issues with various other kinds of addictive behaviors, let's say, in our culture, because we don't know how to comfort and soothe ourselves. And so I think that the number one reason behind the development of eating disorders is not vanity. It is not even dieting. Dieting can contribute. Certainly, it starts the diet binge cycle, but it is the lack of ability to self-soothe and comfort ourselves in times of distress.
Wow, now that is a very good point. Now let's go back, say, 200 years. Was there any eating disorders, or were people just happy to have food? How did that develop?
There actually were eating disorders, but it was very much tied to, look, if you look back and I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there 200 years ago, so I can only extrapolate. But having read a book called Starving Girls, was it Fasting Girls? One of those, about the history of anorexia. Anorexia was very much tied to religion, and many young nuns or young girls used to starve themselves, ostensibly out of some wish to be pure for God. But and again, I no longer treat people with anorexia because also you can't think if you're starving your brain. But there always have been stories of people who were, let's say, that the sin of gluttony, right? Which might have been some form of eating disorder, because as long as there are people who are struggling with emotions and they don't know how to do so because our culture says don't feel things, we're going to have those kinds of behaviors. I once treated a man who, when he came to me, was in his 60s. He'd had bulimia since he was 7. And he had bulimia not because he was ever on a diet, not because the culture was telling him this or that, but because it was his only way of coping. And by the way, why food? Because people have often said to me, why is food my thing? One woman said to me, and she was perfectly serious, and this is horrifying. She said, "Why can't I be addicted to meth? At least I'd be skinny." And I I I told her, look, the reason you're turning to food is because our very first experience of love and connection and relationship is being held in someone's arms, a parent's arms. We're held in someone's arms. They're looking at us with an expression of love. We feel this sense of bliss and care and connection. And that moment is also when we're being fed. So that those times register in our psyches as relationship is food. Food is relationship. So when we talk about, even in our culture, comfort food is really the wish to be comforted by someone else. Other expressions in our culture speak to this, hungry for love, starving for affection. And so it's really embedded in our psyche that food and relationship are one. But if people can disappoint us, they can be unreliable, unavailable, and unpredictable. Food is reliable, available, and predictable. You are never going to have a bowl of ice cream and have it taste like spinach or turnips, or I'm trying to think of the most disgusting thing, right? It's always they are unlike people. And so often we can come to turn to food for comfort, for distraction, all of that, because we can't turn to people.
Wow, we can't turn to people. Now, let me ask you, why is it that we lost that connection to other people that is just as gratifying as food could be? Or are there other ways to soothe ourselves in our society today?
Well, uh, because our culture has baked into it, sorry to use somewhat of a food metaphor, this idea of don't feel your feelings. So people aren't actually very nurturing. And I can give you an example of myself with my daughter. And it's about her physical pain, but it has implications to how we respond to emotional pain. So when she was about 6 years old, she skinned her knee, and she came to me and she's crying copious tears. And she's like, "Mommy, my knee, it hurts so much." And I look at it and I say, everything wrong. Immediately, I go into mom mode, do everything wrong. I say, "Oh, that's not that bad." She's like crying. I said, "Oh, let's just get a Band-Aid. We'll clean it. We'll get a Band-Aid. You'll be good as new." She's crying, "But Mom, it hurts. It really hurts." Ah. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing the thing. I'm doing the thing I tell everybody never to do with their emotional pain, or others or themselves. So I realize I'm doing it, and I say, actually, that looks like it really hurts. That looks painful. And she sort of sniffled, she stopped crying, and she said, "Yeah. Now can I have that Band-Aid?" So what happened? As when I was trying to make her feel better by telling her, inadvertently dismissing her physical pain, she did not feel heard. She felt dismissed. And when I acknowledged her pain, she felt heard, she felt acknowledged, recognized, validated, and that's when she could stop crying. So that's what we have to do with people's emotional pain and our own emotional pain, but we're not doing it. We live in a culture of toxic positivity. So then you feel bad, and then you feel bad because you can't just positive think your way out of it.
Hmm.
And so we're not learning that sometimes it's like, oh, that hurts. We're not learning to express our feelings, validate, acknowledge, and reassure ourselves. And so we turn to food for relief.
To stuff down the lack that we feel in the emotional area. And I love when you said toxic positivity, because, yeah, the positive thinking, oh my God, just think yourself rich. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. I tried
Just
it, I went
manifest.
bankrupt. So, painful. But you can recover from that. Just you can recover from the painful feelings that cause you to binge eat or overeat or eat disorderly, as you probably would say, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, because you cannot drop feelings, you cannot ignore them, You cannot positive think them away, gratitude them away, and you certainly cannot stuff them down. Um, and I, a lot of times people say, well, I guess I just need to sit through my feelings. No, you can't sit through them either. It has to be a process of naming them, expressing them, and also like, what does it mean? What does the situation mean to you before you then comfort yourself with words? Um, and so we don't know how to do that. And I remember one person came in, she said, well, I tried talking to myself and it didn't work at all. And I said, okay, well, what did you say to yourself and how did you say it? And she said, well, I said to myself, it's going to be all right. You know, it's all right. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Just like that. And I said, oh, that's all right. You're going to be fine. Like, who would feel better with those words in that tone? I said, you can use the same words in a different tone. It's all right. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Has a completely different feeling. So it's not just the words that we say when we go to comfort ourselves, but it is the way that we say them.
That is really important. And I see something client, they say, I don't want to be that big. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do. It doesn't work, right? Why does that not work? When I tell myself what I don't want.
Exactly. And, you know,
I call
we
that
often,
the crocodile effect, because when I tell my clients, try to not think of a crocodile for just 10 seconds, what pops in everybody's head, and they haven't thought of a crocodile all day, but that will make them think of it.
of
And
course.
the same with food. And I love your book, The Binge Cure. Tell me a little bit more about the strategies you explain in that book.
Well, you know, for 6.5 years, I hosted a show on LA Talk Radio, the Dr. Nina show, and I would get, you know, I had written academic books, and people would say, where can I read about the things that you're talking about on your show? Where can I read about this? And I thought, well, you can't, because it's in my head, or there's no mainstream book that talks about these strategies. And then I realized I had to write it. So I did, and I'm really happy that I wrote it, and so many people have now read it and embraced the Binge Cure Method. But I go through many different steps of helping you liberate yourself from emotional eating, because I don't really like the term recovery, because we're in recovery. It's something we're in, as opposed to liberation is we've fought the war, we've won, and now it's in our past. We are liberated. So the path to liberation is, first of all, you know, you got to stop dieting. Again, diet's focused on what you are eating and not why. And I say, hey, it's all about why power, not willpower. And then I help you discover some of the hidden reasons you may be eating. And let me just tell a story about what I mean by that, because I think hearing about people's experiences is really helpful when I talk about some of these principles. This woman, Jen, I call her Jenna, not her real name. And she came to me and said, hey, Dr. Nina, some of your people might struggle with emotional issues. She's like, she told me she's a food addict and she can prove it, knowing I do not believe in food addiction, maybe eating addiction. So I said, okay, I'm all ears. And she tells me that the night before she had been watching TV, relaxing, nothing was going on in her life, nothing was bothering her, when suddenly, as she put it, Ben and Jerry's was calling her name. She said, calling my name, I am addicted to Chunky Monkey. I said, well, what were you watching before Ben and Jerry's was calling your name? Charmed, her favorite show. So since she was doing something she enjoyed, watching her favorite show, Charmed, there was no reason, or so she thought, that she'd want to down a pint of ice cream. What was the episode about? I asked her. Well, it's when the demon comes down, it breaks the bond between the sisters, they start fighting, and everything gets really nasty and contentious. And I looked at her and said, oh, sisters fighting, huh? Knowing she had a terrible relationship with her sister. And that's when she got it. That's when she realized, oh my gosh, watching the show activated her own conflict about her sister, but before she was consciously aware that she was being triggered, activated, she went to ice cream for comfort and distraction. That is what I mean by identifying the hidden reasons. If we had just said, okay, well, when ice cream calls your name, you know, write in your journal, take a walk, brush your teeth, or all the distractions people are told that don't work, because like if brushing your teeth was a replacement for binge eating disorder, everyone would have the most sparkly white teeth in the world, and that would be it. Great. There'd be like toothpaste stock would go up. It would be amazing. Anyway, so this really points to that there are hidden reasons why you are turning to food. And I have developed a food mood formula, which I describe in the book, that helps you figure out if you can't talk to me one-on-one and have us be detectives and go like, okay, what happened there? I actually give you a formula to help you figure that out. And then I help you learn to express your emotions, learn to heal the past, because the past is not in the past. Our current issues are often, always, I would say almost always, can be found in our past. So we have to look at not what happened, but how what happened is informing our present day reality. And then learn how to be in the present and think about the future. So the book covers all of those elements and really supports you on your journey. And I also wrote the Binge Cure Journal that came out earlier this year, that is a workbook that goes along with the book to help you implement, give you strategies that implement the principles and ideas in the book.
Wow, it sounds like a really amazing strategy, and everybody should take advantage of that and do the exercises, not just read the book and think about it and then say, oh, well, I'll do that sometime. Maybe next year I'll start in January, right? I'll start my diet after New Year. You always have an excuse to not start anything, even get rid of dieting. So if somebody says, "Oh yeah, that's me. I need that book," where can they get it? How can they get what you're offering?
They could get both books on Amazon. It's called The Binge Cure: 7 Steps to Outsmart Emotional Eating, and The Binge Cure Journal. They can also go to my website, Dr. Nina Inc., DrNinaInc.com. You can just Google my name and find me. I'm on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You can join my Dr. Nina's Food for Thought community on Facebook, and get on my mailing list, and I'll send you weekly food for thought and strategies to help you achieve your own liberation.
Wow, that is absolutely necessary. If you watch that, you feel that appeals to you, please do it. I'll put the links under the video of Dr. Nina so you can directly do it right now. Don't hesitate, don't procrastinate. Get that book. It's the backside you're showing, Nina.
There it is.
7 steps. You can do it. So I highly recommend to do it. So to close this up, what is one point you want to leave the viewer after this episode to do next, besides getting your book? Essential. What's the next step
I
after?
actually don't want to give a step. I want to say this because I treat so many people who have struggled for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years. And they tell me, I've struggled with this for 50 years. How the heck am I going to, change now? So I want to say, no matter how long you've struggled, no matter how bad it is, there is hope. I just finished one of my group programs. It is 9 weeks long, and one of the women in there has struggled with this for 40 years, and she's like, I cannot believe that in 9 weeks I see things completely differently, and I'm starting to make substantive changes. So I just want to leave people with the idea of absolute hope. It is never too late to change your relationship with yourself, the world, and with food.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Dr. Nina. And this ends this episode of Sparkles for Better Mental Health. And if emotional eating is your thing, go see Dr. Nina. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.